Good evening. You're watching The Big Picture. Yes, today we're talking about the new economic roadmap as defined by the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley himself. He's been in Davos in Switzerland for a couple of days, meeting investors from across the globe. He's been pitching to invest in India, and it's been a smart pitch. It's been scripted well. But what are the details of that script? We'll be talking about that. He's outlined major reforms, and he said that already the reforms are in the process of happening as we speak. So not to expect too much from the budget, but what can we expect from the budget? We'll be talking about that as well. To help us decipher the Finance Minister's message, we have with us Professor Santosh Mehrotra. He is a professor of economics at JNU. Mr. Priyaranjan is with us. He's an economic analyst and a very senior journalist. Thank you very much for both of you for coming in. Also from the Congress, we have Salman, spokesperson of the Congress, and from the BJP, Mr. Narasimha, national spokesperson of the BJP. Thank you all of you for coming in. Mr. Dash, I'll start with you. I mean, you've been hearing what the Finance Minister for the past couple of days has been saying at Davos to woo the global investor, to repose faith in the Indian economy. He's saying the growth rate could touch 9% even next year. So it's a smart pitch, won't you say?
Yes, it is a smart pitch. But more than a pitch, I would say that the most significant thing that he's spoken in this gathering is to reiterate his commitment to the path of fiscal consolidation.
Right.
And he's going to present the budget on the 28th of February. And coming before, as it does, this kind of a pronouncement that he's sticking to the original roadmap that was actually drawn up by the UPA government by Mr. Chidambaram as finance minister. And he's not going to, relax the targets which were fixed to bring down the government's borrowings to less than 3% of the economy, of the GDP. Now, that's a very tough target, but he's sticking to that roadmap. That's a huge reform, I would say. Following from that, all that he's spoken about, keeping control of subsidies, he's said that in a country like India, you cannot just wish away subsidies.
Right.
Abolition of subsidy is neither possible nor desirable.
Right.
Totally. So what he's saying is, in terms of controlling subsidy, putting a cap on it, he's already said that petrol and diesel are decontrolled.
Yeah.
So you have cooking gas, you have kerosene. There are, of course, a sizable section of beneficiaries who actually do not deserve it and could well afford paying the market rate for these products rather than depend on government doles.
All right.
So one could expect him to take steps in that direction of, weeding out these, the creamy layer, so to say, from these kind of energy subsidies.
All right.
And so to the extent that the international energy prices today are helping him consolidate his fiscal position, both by way of savings in subsidies and by in other ways.
And he has candidly admitted that. And I'll let you continue, because I want to get in Professor Mehrotra, just extending from what you were saying about the other points that the Finance Minister has made, about the fact that the big bang economic reforms have already been set in motion. Would you agree with that, or do you expect the government to do a lot more? What do you see in the offing?
Broadly, I would go along with that, but I would add, hopefully, I would add my hopes about the budget in a second, if you give me a second. Because it's true to say that the reforms in railways, in defense, in mining, in insurance, these are big ticket reforms which are on the way and which have already been initiated. Insurance will need to be legislated upon and not merely an ordinance. So we'll wait to see. However, we are waiting to, and it's all, let me add two other things which have indeed been announced. One is the LPG subsidy reform, which is a very important thing which has been delayed for a very long time. The second subsidy reform, which in a sense there's only an intent which has been announced, and my suspicion is that the details are being worked out, is kerosene subsidy reform. And that's absolutely critical, because kerosene subsidy reform has been talked about for a very long time. Efforts have been made, but they have been systematically sabotaged in the past. What I'm hoping may happen just before the budget and during the budget is that we will get the interim report of the Expenditure Management Commission. An interim report is supposed to be produced before the budget, so the finance minister may be able to use recommendations from it to announce some actual measures in the budget. And the second big thing that I'm hoping for in order to get Make in India going is the inverted duty structure reform across the board in a large number of sectors, a process which he had initiated in the last budget in July, but it didn't go far enough. It was the beginning which sort of whetted our appetite for more.
All right, and he initiated quite a lot in the large budget, and he would have to allocate resources, as we were talking about a little earlier, to those projects as well. But I want to get in the Congress in over here, because the FM seems to be saying that he's willing to take the hard decisions, even if he has to call for a joint session of Parliament and get the insurance ordinance made into a bill. They're willing to do that. So as far as the message to the global investor that India means business is what the finance minister is saying. Would you agree with that, Salman Soz?
Well, in many respects, the finance minister is actually continuing many of the policies that the UPA government laid out. Whether it's in defense, whether it's insurance, pensions, we started things including deregulation in decontrol of, say, diesel prices. Yes. I mean, the government has actually lucked out quite a bit because of the fall in the international crude prices, which actually helped decontrol of petrol. And by the way, even when you talk about insurance, this is something that the Congress Party also wants to do. However, the main thing that the Congress Party is looking out for is what happens to the other side. You know, we clearly want the economy going, and there is a lot of scope for that. And things are improving in the country in that sense. But we noticed some worrying trends on the social side. Social sector spending has already even before this government is 1 year old, has already seen some cuts. You know, whether you talk about higher education, you talk about health spending. Health spending has been cut by about 20%. HIV/AIDS funding has been cut by about $250 million. It's about a 30% cut. So I think on the one hand, the government talks about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. On the other hand, we see some worrying trends on the social sector spending side. And then, of course, is that going to be exacerbated in the future by cuts in subsidies to those who need it the most? So I think we'll have to keep an eye on that. So, for us, it's a holistic view. We want inclusive and equitable development. All right,
so inclusive development, you're saying, and the finance minister would have to really come out and specify as far as how that subsidy is going to be managed, as far as rationalizing the subsidy burden of kerosene is concerned. LPG has already said that the cash transfer is working. But as you, Mr. Dash, you would agree perhaps with me as far as the social sector expenditure for the government. And this is, Mr. G.V.L. Narasimha, will come to you on this also. That is the major concern, and that is where the finance minister would look to shore up his his monies from.
Well, he has very little choice. The cuts that has happened this year is because he was running against a very tough target of keeping his budget on track, and so those cuts have happened. And many of these schemes, for instance, the NREGA, for instance, being a demand-based scheme, fortunately this year you've had, in terms of, the rains were not, they were uneven, but they were adequate. As a result, you have not had the kind of demand you would have in a drought year. So fortunately that has been the case. To that extent, some of these social sector schemes, although there has been a squeeze in spending, the impact is not as severe, the social impact is not as severe as it would happen. But when the finance minister says that you cannot wish away subsidies, he also, obviously, in a country like India, realizes the need for the social sector schemes to continue, the rural health scheme, or the rural, all those
employment guarantee.
Yes. So now, but the main emphasis is going to be hopefully on infrastructure, both on physical infrastructure and on social infrastructure.
All right.
And so expenditure is something that is very difficult for him to control. Because in addition to the schemes which were already and the programs which are already being implemented, he, for instance, has announced so many schemes in the budget, which was the first budget of the new government.
I'll come to you on that point because I want that to be my next point. Sorry, Mr. Das, for interrupting you over there. Because Mr. GVL Narasimha, I want to come to you on the question of balanced growth, of the question of the social sector spending versus other spending. And that is the concern that the Congress seems to be voicing as far as the Finance Minister's new economic roadmap is concerned.
Yeah, actually there are many areas of concern because the Congress party left the economy in shambles, and they have committed a huge fraud on the people of the country by window dressing the balance sheets, by showing a fiscal deficit which is completely unrealistic, by indulging in tax terrorism.
We'll talk about the new economic roadmap now for the new government,
which has now to be returned. No, I'm saying, so because the numbers that were presented by Chidambaram in his interim budget were a complete dressed up numbers, and they did not reflect the reality. So we have inherited a very economy in shambles. So I think the government has now started building upon this. Now we are at a stage where economy is turning around. We have a low inflation, high interest rate, we have low inflation, and in fact even the interest rates are going down. So we certainly see the economy in a take-off stage. So some of the inherited discomforts, inherited problems of the government will remain in the first year. So as we move forward, I think we certainly think we'll be able to have better revenues, mainly on account of improved performance of the economy. And hopefully, I think we can even increase the spending in the coming years. I think, therefore, the Congress party's criticism, I think on the one hand, you see, on the social sector spending, let me clarify. I have not seen, there is no, I think a lot of speculation is going on about spending cuts in health and other sectors.
Right.
I think it's highly, it's not really borne out by evidence or borne out by facts. These are merely speculative media reports. Therefore, I think before you make any such conclusions, I would like you to just examine the facts and not jump into conclusions based on some campaign that goes on.
It's not about a campaign. I mean, these are facts, they are hard facts that the decisions that the government has had to make. I mean, in the previous budget, as you were mentioning, Mr. Professor Mehrotra.
You know, there is an issue about social spending getting squeezed in a situation where government is committed to a certain budget deficit target. And the budget deficit, you know, the spending has already been, the spending limits or caps on spending had already been hit. That's where the scope of, concerns about social spending. However, and we must also state, in order to sort of elaborate a little bit on Mr. Rao's point, that as far as health spending is concerned, I didn't see any evidence. I looked at the numbers a bit carefully. I didn't see any evidence of actual cuts. What I did see was that there was a notional reduction of about 20% from what was planned to be spent over the 12th plan for this financial year. You know, that's purely notional. The real worry, in fact, is twofold. That the UPA had unfortunately not managed to raise the health spending to GDP ratio. You know, very limited rise in health spending to GDP ratio. And one can't afford to, when your health spending is at the bottom of the league table, when you compare us to other emerging market economies or other developing countries, you can't afford to keep health spending constant, because that's the fear. Right. That health spending, if it remains constant in nominal terms, then actually in real terms, that is a reduction. So where are the resources going to come from? The resources we were hoping were going to come from divestment of public sector enterprises. The latest news is that, you know, a brake has been put on that, which is unfortunate, and I was a bit surprised by that news, because as the Sensex is rising, one of the reasons why the governor actually reduced the interest rate was in fact to give a bump up to the market, to the capital market, so that the public sector could actually go out there and divest. That's being put a brake on. I'm surprised about that. we are also hoping that some release of resources might happen on account of the LPG subsidy coming down.
Right.
But if that happens, there might be some additional resources. The Expenditure Management Commission's interim report, and if those that gives you low-hanging fruit, and that's what we are expecting from this interim report, that might, you know, reduce some unnecessary expenditure. That might release resources. So we are still hoping that that the trajectory in health spending should be sustained. A trajectory in rising education expenditure must be sustained.
Right.
It will be a great tragedy if that doesn't happen.
All right, Mr. Dash, coming back to you, the point that you were raising a little bit earlier about the fact that there were so many other schemes that were launched in the previous budget itself, and Mr. Jaitley would have to earmark resources for those as well.
Yes, means, you know, just take for instance this Heritage City program. Now the Heritage, which has been launched day for yesterday. Now 12 heritage cities which are to be developed. Now Mr. Jaitley could afford to put 100 crore rupees for each of these 24 programs of the new government. These are new programs in the current budget, rightly so, because the absorptive capacity of government departments to be able to actually flesh out these schemes and to be able to spend the money during the financial year was not there. Right. In any case, the budget was being presented on July 10th, which was after a quarter of the financial year was over. Now that being the case, but next year Mr. Jaitley doesn't have that luxury. If he has to carry forward those 24 schemes, he'll have to make real provisions for them. So that will mean, because by that time, or by the time the budget is presented, and for it to be implemented, for these programs to be implemented in the next financial year onward, he will need to provide, real kind of outlays which could be spent on this. So on the expenditure side, I do not think he has any leg room there, except for what he has spoken about in terms of keeping a control on subsidy, where he could hope for substantial savings if he takes out from the cooking gas and from the kerosene the beneficiaries who do not deserve it. In addition to now this new, direct cash transfer that has happened, which will cut down on duplication and leakages, that could be substantial savings there. And the international oil prices are providing a saving otherwise as well. But basically for the government spending, be it in the social sector or elsewhere, in terms of investment to grow, Mr. Jaitley has to finance it from the revenues, and revenues won't go unless your economic activity grows. And so economic activity has to get back to high growth path for revenues to grow, for the government to be able to spend on social sector.
All right, that's a medium-term perspective. I was giving the more short-run perspective where resources could potentially be released.
How he would juggle things perhaps in this budget. But coming to another point Mr. Jaitley had made, and he talked about retrospective taxation, the fact that that had created a sort of distrust or not a very nice sort of outlook for the Indian economy from the global investors' perspective, and he's tried to put that fear aside, Salman Soos, and he blamed the previous government for that. Mr. Soos, can you hear me? All right, we seem to have lost the audio connection over there.
Yes.
All right.
Can I come in? No, sorry, let him come. No.
Okay, yes, you want to come in?
No, you see, on the tax issue, on the previous government's record on this, it is really very tragic. And it was not in the interest of the country, in a sense. The word that has been used is tax terrorism, and that's precisely what it was. Let me give you what the facts are on this. I mean, you need to know what the factual situation is. That there were so many demands made on a number of large enterprises, both foreign as well as domestic, which seem to be exaggerated claims by the income tax department, and those were disputed by companies. Companies took the government to court. They were not determined. As a result, you had a situation that not a penny was actually flowing into the government's kitty, and yet the image of the country was suffering. So you had the following situation. This is the fact that I want to have noted, that there were more tax revenues which were under dispute than the actual taxes that were being collected as far as corporates were concerned. This is genuine tax terrorism, not a very good situation to be in when the economy is on the downturn.
And let's pose that to Salman Soz, because the finance minister seems to be suggesting that in Davos itself, that as far as that retrospective taxation is concerned, Professor Mehrotra was calling it tax terrorism. I mean, the UPA really bungled up on that one, is what the finance minister is saying, and now hopes that the global investor finds confidence in the fact that the finance minister is saying he'll rationalize and he'll ensure that the taxation is fair.
Look, terms like tax terrorism and this is right-wing orthodoxy as far as I'm concerned. I've objected to the use of this term earlier as well. I think comparing terrorism to tax terrorism, I think this is just plain wrong. I think the BJP has fallen under the spell of right-wing economists in the United States. Their whole low tax regime, limited regulation, low environmental standards. I think these kinds of policies are going to cost this country dear. Instead of really looking at an economy holistically, I think the BJP is really paying lip service to things which actually are needed. For example, human development. I mean, they're the ones who actually talked about how we need skill development, and we've been actually trying to push that a lot. They talked about things like massive open online courses. And what do they do now? They cut it by what, 80–90%, the allocation for that. They cut higher education by 20–30%. I mean, they pay lip service to things that are needed by the young
Mr.
people
Soz,
of this country.
I'd like to bring you back to the fact of, you were just talking about taxation.
Do great things for
I think there are no elections now.
All right, we will not get into the rhetoric side of the debate.
On the retrospective taxation,
still seems to be in a campaigning mode.
What did the BJP do? Did they actually, did they rescind that? Did they revoke it?
All right,
they've been in power for 8 months.
All right, my final question, because I have running out of time.
Why haven't they done that? Can Mr. Narasimha Rao talk about it? He's a political analyst, but on economics, I think he needs to do a little bit more.
I think the finance minister talked about it.
The
finance minister spoke about it in his budget speech.
Just a minute, please. All right, so we're talking about
okay, we totally disagree with this.
Mr. Rao, Mr. Soz, just please a minute. We're talking because we just have 5 minutes to wrap it up. I'll have to take final questions, otherwise only from the studio. So my final question is just about the fact that the finance minister in Davos has said, as far as his intent on the ordinances is concerned, he'll push them through no matter what, even if a joint session is required. Would the Congress be willing to go along as far as the insurance bill is concerned? Because the finance minister is saying that the Congress is on our side on this one. Mr. Soz.
Well, the insurance bill, for example, yes, we want to get this stuff done. We want this country to move forward. We want our economy to kind of reach its potential. Of course, we want to. Ultimately, it is also, we have to see the intent of the government as well. And by the way, the government cannot just say we just want our bills to be passed. They have to address real concerns of the people of this country, and that includes how this country takes everybody along, not just a few people.
All right, so you're saying, perhaps in just one word, as the UPA's term was inclusive growth, and that is what you want this government to follow as well. Mr. Narasimha Rao, obviously you know what the finance minister, or you would be perhaps a little privy to what the BJP is thinking as far as the wish list from the finance minister. But Mr. Dash, I want to get in, and final questions, gentlemen, as far as the wish list is concerned. You'd expressed a lot over here, but just perhaps 2 things that you would want the finance minister to talk about in his budget.
No, means I think for too long, politics has held the economy of the country, the national economy, to ransom.
Right.
Now, I think it's time that India moved on. And, a joint seating is not a solution.
Right.
The polity has to find way of making progress on the economic legislation that the country, the national economy requires at this point of time. Now, here you've had both formations, both major political formations, agreeing on specific economic programs or economic legislation, and yet the country is not getting it.
Right.
Now, things like an ordinance Raj or a joint sitting, you've had just 2 joint sittings in history. It's not going to work. You know, in any case, Mr. Jaitley is saying that he will get these passed in the joint sitting. Now, these procedures and, you know, investors, economic players have no patience for this. Now, he's gone ahead and in Davos, for instance, he has said that, well, you come and now come and invest in the insurance sector because, you know, the ordinance is in place. So legally, you can go up to 49%. So please come in by the time the ordinance lapses or gets converted into a law. Now, that's not going to work with the investors because people who doubt whether these ordinance will actually get passed. You know, I do not know the constitutional provision and the technicalities of it. It could require the law, the bill to be rejected by one house first, to be passed by one house and then rejected by another house for a joint sitting to happen. Now, the other house hasn't yet rejected it. So all that will take time, and I think that given the economic urgency and, you know, I think people are just, so this attempt at inviting the world to come and take advantage of the economic opportunities in India, that will work by, if the polity sets its things in order.
So the India, perhaps, the Indian polity needs to think together. GVL Narasimha, a very quick response because we have absolutely run out of time. You wanted to come in.
Yeah, you see, the opposition parties and particularly the Congress have been claiming that they support all this economic legislation, but they want their other concerns addressed. I think it's nothing but hypocrisy because all these concerns have vanished the day Parliament got adjourned. I think where have their concerns? We have not been hearing these concerns subsequently. They want to simply stall Parliament and they want to simply prevent the government from going ahead with any legislation that can turn around the economy because they think that will give the BJP and the government a lot of scoring points. I think this is purely, I think, I would say, anti-economy, anti-development kind of a stance. We certainly wanted to send a signal to the opposition. That's the reason why the party had to promulgate ordinances to show the urgency. And we will certainly... We will do our best to get them on board. If they don't want to come on board, it will still be passed in a joint session of Parliament.
That's what the Finance Minister also said.
Time has come when we cannot wait any further.
India cannot wait any further. That's what the Finance Minister is also saying. Come invest in India. That's the message at Davos. Thank you very much, gentlemen, all of you for coming in. We've absolutely run out of time, Professor Mehrotra. So next time we'll talk about the wish list for the Finance Minister. I promise to invite you over here as well. Thank you very much for coming in, Mr. Dash. It was a pleasure having you on the show. And Salman Soz and GVL Narasimha, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your party's perspective on the Finance Minister's new economic roadmap. Well, he's defined the roadmap. He's setting the road, laying out the road. Who comes on board, who drives on the road, whether it's the global investor, whether it's the ordinary Indian. We'll have to wait and watch as far as the big announcements in the budgets and the ones preceding the budget. But we'll, of course, keep you updated on all those. But that's all in the big picture for today. Thanks so much for watching.